Miss Linda Batts. Welcome to Sistabiz, everyone. September 1st. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Absolutely.
Oh, September came fast, didn't it? Whew.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes, it did. Yes, it
Wow. Almost Christmas.
did. Yeah. Yeah. So tonight we wanted to talk about leadership and accountability. And that's why we have Ms. Batts on. That's a topic she also wanted to discuss with us. So again, we're going to welcome Ms. Batts back to the conversation. We are going to focus this week on the Baltimore City. When we talk about, leadership and accountability, we talked about it a lot. We touched on it a lot with Lawrence Bell last week, right, Nicole? Like he was talking about that seemed to be like a common response of his, accountability, the lack of accountability. We failed to hold leaders accountable with everything going on in the city, crime, grime, schools not having air conditioning, $600 million coming down the pike. I mean, we just got so much to discuss, so much dissatisfaction amongst the constituents. We definitely wanted to talk about leadership and accountability. So, how you want to start off this on this Wednesday, Nicole?
Let's jump right into
so
it.
Much to pick from. It's so much.
I know. I mean, for me, I was definitely puzzled by both Baltimore City, Baltimore County with the school systems, with the air conditions. Kids were out of school for a year. I mean, that's the perfect opportunity, to put some filters or something or whatever the situation may be. So I mean, that was startling. Then we have the OIG. I mean, like she's under fire. I don't know what that's about, but that's a little. Well, that's what the brew is saying, that, they're reviewing her position and things that she's done and who she's investigating. But I guess she's partially doing what she's supposed to do. Partially.
Well, okay, so let's start with that. The OIG. And Ms. Batts, maybe you can give some input on that. So we know we've had a show about that. Specifically, we talked a lot about it. We had an Inspector General from PG County come in and talk about, the PG County Sheriff's Office, and kind of talk about some standards and things that we thought were the norm. And I was interested to see some of the questions that they did ask, like what about the investigations that aren't public? Do you have a record of all the calls and requests for investigations that you get? I would like to see that. And he stated that we should be able to see that. So I don't think that she's under fire, because that review panel is supposed to review, her performance. I don't know what they're measuring it against. I don't know if they are looking at the reports that haven't come out. It would have been good that they got that data before that discussion, to say, okay, why didn't you investigate this, and this? It kind of seemed like she was just giving information, but not data. And, like I always say, it's better to give before someone has to ask for something. So me going into something like that, I think I would have had all of that and had the panel review it before the meeting for more transparency. That's just me. Linda, any input on that as far as like how that whole review session went? With leadership and accountability, again, are they truly holding the Inspector General accountable?
So I always have a fundamental lens that I look through when there are panels constituted to provide oversight and assistance to a reported individual who is supposed to be somewhat autonomous in his or her jurisdiction of investigations. And that is, how is that panel constituted and whose orders are they following? Is there a legitimate, transparent barometer that they are using to measure and assess, or are they really coming in with an agenda that is pre-decided and predisposed to yield an outcome? And I think that's how we have to look at it. And clearly, from my perspective, if the Inspector General is to be overseen by an independent body, then what role does the citizenry of the city have in terms of constituting that body and participating as a voice in that body? Exactly. Those are questions that are near and dear to me. And having come from a wide platform in Washington across 8 agencies, having worked with leading leaders and influencers in the federal government who were courageous and visionary. I take to heart the charter of an office that has as its mission rooting out corruption and other inherent practices that are associated with its role and mission. So those are questions that are clear, and I think the public deserves answers. But I also think that the public is so overwhelmed with so many other issues and insanities that are all operating concurrently that it's hard to unbundle and decide which battle requires the strongest legion at any particular point in time. You just mentioned school just started. This wasn't something that just happened surreptitiously or serendipitously. We knew school was starting, just like Christmas is coming the 25th of December. We knew the schools were empty. We knew what had to be done to resuscitate systems that had not been checked, to test them and to prepare them and to make them safe and habitable for our students and our teachers and those who come in there. This is a function of leadership. Leadership has a role in managing people and in managing outcomes. And if the leaders aren't managing the people and giving the public the outcomes, and there are no consequences associated with that absentee performance, then why are we even having a conversation?
For me, I don't know, but today, Brandon Scott, Mayor of Baltimore City, gets on. He has his COVID updates. And I mean, coming from a healthcare background, we all know that viruses breed in heat, right? So how do you have these children in this heat with no air condition and you're steady concerned about COVID rates raising? So that's my main concern, that we know viruses and bacteria breed in heat, right? So why would you have them in closed environments? It just makes, I don't get the logic. Why send them back to school if they were not prepared? I'm just being honest. Like Baltimore City, Baltimore County, why send them back to school?
Because we have in our government people going to work every day in spaces that are not habitable, in spaces that aren't safe. So we've become normalized to the inanity of having people go into spaces where the windows aren't functioning, or the ventilation isn't proper, or the floors aren't, they don't have the traction that's necessary for safe traversing. Any one of a number of things. The bathrooms are not up to date and up to code. Any one of a number of things that have been budgeted for in capital budgets over years, that people are brought in with broad and grandiose commitments to sweep through and make changes, and it goes back to accountability. Who is holding whom accountable? And if they are not, then why?
Right. So okay, we're gonna finish up with the Inspector General. Jess Morgan made a comment. I think we need to reconstruct the board, the oversight board of the OIG, and it be placed back on the ballot to do so with people she doesn't have to investigate. I don't. So I was gonna make a comment about that, and that's why I definitely wanted to bring that out. I wanted to say that the panel, the voters didn't vote that portion of that in. I think the constituents that voted her independent should have some insight in the progress and the work that she's actually doing. I would like to see it more public, because it kind of it got circumvented and it went back into City Hall. And I think what the president of UB and the president of Morgan, I think they can participate, and that's kind of like representative of the community at whole. I don't know. Really. I would like to have more input, because I know that there are probably people out there that have made complaints and they haven't seen anything happen. So those people need to have an opportunity to confront the inspector general and ask her, what's going on with that. And those are the people that voted. Those are the people that live in the city. They may see corruption and waste and fraud, and they don't have any input. So we voted that independence, and we don't have any other say in anything else. And I don't think it's so much of a concern that she's maybe investigating some of the people that are on the panel, because the questions that they asked, I didn't really see any in-depth questions that was covered in the article that kind of made it feel like she couldn't investigate them. Although there is a conflict. Yeah, if you are investigating somebody, it could look retaliatory. Now, if she investigates one of them, it could look like she's retaliating against them in some sense if they ask the question. So I'm sure if one of them does come out with a report, they're going to say it was retaliatory.
But isn't similar boards, like say, for instance, the Maryland Board of Nursing, as well as like the Maryland Home Improvement, don't they have like people from the community that sit on their boards, as well as the other normal parties? So why can't they implement that to have a regular citizen? I don't necessarily think anyone from the anchor institutions represent the mass population, because they're getting a lot of their funding from them. You know what I mean?
Like, have a representative, and it should be voted by the neighborhood, not by them picking their friends. But each neighborhood, I think, should have a representative.
Well, and what you've suggested just means that there are alternative ways to create a more transparent, a more open government, where folks have the confidence that if they're going to make a report or a complaint, that it's going to be investigated with due diligence and expediently, and that there's going to be an outcome that should be made available to the public. And we've got too many influencers that are trying to recreate the way this system is supposed to work. There are too many other models of good government in terms of how investigatory bodies should work. And we should be learning from them. That's what leaders do. Leaders look out and seek out best practices and bring them back and test them against stated traditions and stated practices. And we don't do a lot of that. Baltimore, as I have seen it, has grown very comfortable in allowing sameness to replicate itself. And I believe the citizens need to insist on a different outcome.
Right. You took that right out of my mouth. Best practices. That's something in the corporate world I heard all the time, in the federal sector all the time. And when I got to Baltimore, I never heard best practices. It was constantly reinventing the wheel and making the wheel square, and like not inventing it right. It didn't work. So it's like, it was very strange to me. And I would reach out to other jurisdictions. Like I had regular meetings with like the folks in New York and their MBE office. And I was trying to set up a best practices group just for that, for jurisdictions that did the same work that we did, where we can share documentation and we can share ideas. And so we're not always on the phone trying to call somebody and figure out, what's going on and how should we do something. There needed to be a platform for that. Mm-hmm. And it just seemed so odd to everyone to reach to do that, to kind of collaborate with other cities that are similar infrastructure, similar old aging infrastructure. So New York, Philadelphia, places like that, I was very interested in collaborating with. So best practices is not something that they're doing clearly. And that's reflective of the OIG's office. I don't know where, I know they have like, all the OIGs kind of get together and they have meetings in different places. They have an annual event or something. I don't know what they're learning from that. And I do know they participate. I just don't know what information they're taking from that. If they're saying, hide everything you can from the constituents, don't let anybody know where all the reports are, let whistleblowers disappear. I don't know where Isabel Cummings is getting any of that. Again, I'd love to have her on the show to talk about what she's doing in her office that she can talk about, but I don't think she'd ever come. So, so now moving back to the schools, Ms. Sandalisa, I know Donnie had a show on this network last night where they talked about the schools. I missed it. I need to watch it. They kind of got into that. We're going to get into it a little bit tonight. So you guys kind of highlighted that. We knew that COVID was here. We knew the kids weren't in school. The schools were sitting empty. What an opportunity to take some money and fix the schools. The ventilation, we knew that was this was an airborne virus. So why not go and do something? And I do know when I was in Baltimore and they were doing all the emergency spending for COVID, why? And they knew they were going to get federal reimbursements. Why weren't they doing some of that work? And I wonder whose decision that was to decide that we weren't going to procure services to make sure that the air worked in the schools. Because Brandon Scott was complaining about the heat and the air when he was running for office in the schools, and then did nothing about it when the kids returned to school. And this is about accountability. Again, this show's about leadership and accountability. Who do we hold accountable for that?
So the first question I would ask, and I always like to trace the dollars, where does the funding stream come in for the school? And where does the funding stream come in for the salaries of the highest paid administrators? Because ultimately, if it's solely taxpayer revenue, then, the leaders are responsible to the citizens. And in that regard, their performance plans should be transparent and available for public review so that we can see the standards against which they're being measured. And one of those standards would be the people standards. Another standard would be the capital standard, the building standard, the safety that's associated with all of that. And if we can't see that, then shame on us.
Linda, did you just say that these people running agencies and organizations that are getting paid with our dollars, we should have visibility into their performance plans and be able to measure and gauge their performance?
You can't even speak at the meetings. They won't even allow you to ask them questions.
Because that is what we allow. And I have seen, listen, I was in Washington at the point of 9/11, and I saw how agencies that historically were siloed and in different corners of the room could come together to form solutions in a transparent and open manner to create a new vision of safety for our nation. I have seen divided groups come together with citizens, with leaders, with elected representatives and officials and make things work. But it doesn't happen overnight, although it can happen overnight. 9/11 happened overnight and we moved very quickly. But all I'm saying is that in the private sector, when retail establishments go out of business, they go out of business because they don't have revenue. And they don't have revenue in sales and retails because they're not meeting a need or because something has happened that expressly changes the trajectory of why people are buying. And so that's why you have in the retail industry where their continued livelihood is dependent upon meeting the needs of the people. You have that relationship. In our system of doing business, we pay taxes, we get no service, the relationship still continues. The people still remain in office, they get recycled for various reasons, but they do not demonstrate the outcomes that reflect good leadership. When you've been in an environment with real leaders, you know what to expect and you know what can happen. I think part of the malaise in Baltimore City might be that there hasn't been an oversaturation of real leaders such that that influence is contagious. and that people feel comfortable with now stretching their arms and growing and breathing fresh air and being creative and innovative and entrepreneurial, where they're treated fairly, where salaries are equitable, where discipline is meted out fairly, where buildings are safe and safe spaces exist within buildings for people to think and live and differ with the establishment. When you've not worked in an environment like that, you don't know what it is. So you just acclimatize yourself to the constraints of the existing four walls that you're in. And that's so unfortunate.
That's right. I think if we look at the resume, the traditional agency head, the ones that are heading agencies now, I know Brandon is bringing in folks from all over the country. I think maybe he thinks he's resolving this issue that you just discussed. This group of people that haven't really worked anywhere. But if you look at the leader, Mayor Scott, Ms. Batts, maybe you have more information what his background is. Who's influenced him. What company or organization did he learn organizational management, people skills?
He ran a business.
I'm asking if he knows what it's like when you have it, when a company hasn't been paid for a year. Does he know what it's like to make payroll? Does he know what it's like? I mean, the analogy that you had was fascinating to me. A retail store where you go and buy goods, clothing, things you need, you may just want, something that's not so impactful on you, but your tax dollars. It's mandated. You have to pay this. You have to do it. You need services in your house like water, that's backing up in your basement. You need your trash picked up. Like, these are things we need. And these are things we have to pay for. I don't have to go to Target and spend all that money that I do when I see cute things. I don't have to do that. But the accountability at the head of Target is higher than the accountability at the head of the city. Like, you're going to see heads roll in Target if marks are not met, if metrics aren't met. I could probably go on Target site and transparency is there. I could see what their goals are, what their mission is, what their CEO, CFO, you can kind of gauge. But something so personal to me, my child's school, the trash in my alley, my water bill,
the crime,
things so personal to me. There's no accountability.
And so we have the metrics. Absolutely. We have the data being collected. The data translates to performance measures by which folks can be held accountable. And the question is,
what do you mean for that?
Do we have different results?
That audit they do every 2 years, Miss Linda?
By who though? I'm sorry. Every minute is data. They collect this, collect that. We're gonna bring the consultants in to look at this, look at that. We'll talk about
consultants in a minute, Nicole.
So I just want to know who holds them accountable, because even if you request, information and you invoke your right, your MPIA, you can do that here in Maryland, right? They don't answer. So who holds them accountable? What is the next step? We know they got problems. So what's next?
Well, there is an organizational chain of command. We know that the leaders of agencies are reporting to the mayor of the city of Baltimore and that executive team that he has appointed. The question is, what are they using to hold folks accountable? That's very simple. And these are, in many instances, we are seeing recycled performance or recycled male performance, over and over again. And that has created this very dialogue that we're talking about right now. The data's there. I beg your pardon?
Let's break it down. Let's start with the mayor. Okay. He's been in for 8 months now. We need to hold him accountable for a lot of things he promised and he's not doing.
So one might ask, is 8 months a reasonable period of time to expect? What is it that you're expecting to see in 8 months? What is the barometer? There was a plan that was produced shortly after the mayor arrived, a very good plan. A very good plan. I don't know why it's going to take outside folks to come in and actualize upon that plan when, in fact, leaders of agencies have the responsibility for carrying out the goals and responsibilities stated therein. I'd like to see that money reappropriated elsewhere. But nonetheless, and notwithstanding that, what is a reasonable period of time to expect an outcome that's different than what we're seeing from a person who is not new to this position or new to the city, who is very familiar with city government by virtue of having had a position with the council, who's very conversant with the city itself? What's reasonable? What should we be expecting?
I think that it's schools. I'm sorry.
Okay. You expected the schools, others expected a change in the safety and security of our city. And maybe we should be expecting all of that, not one in sequence, but all of those goals to be met with some degree of reasonableness and some expectation for change. But yet we're seeing increasing and escalating crime rates. We're seeing sick buildings that our children are being asked to go into, and potable water has to be brought in. And what does that tell you about the people who are leading these particular programs and offices?
So for me, I didn't expect crime to just go down, shoot down when, Mayor Scott took over, or Brandon Scott, because I just, and I didn't expect everything to be perfect. Yeah, schools, I would have expected something a little better than what's happened with schools starting, considering they had been out the whole time, because he was still also city council president, and there was some work that could have been done, but he was busy campaigning. But I can say that internally, Linda, you and I both know the structure of Baltimore city government. There were not resources placed in areas that I would have liked to have seen that would have made a difference in our economy and some of the safety and opportunities that our constituents, the city has. There's some changes that could have been made that he did not make. It didn't trickle down for him to make those changes within the current agencies. How the budget was allocated in certain areas that I think, rather than having money for $100,000 a month consultants, I do believe that the money should have gone in other places. And I do believe we should be holding these agency heads accountable instead of hiring consultants for $600,000 for 6 months. Oh, and then with the what, 1 year contract with 2 extension options, which we know they're going to exercise, who was probably somebody's friend, who probably left the city and needed a job, who probably has Kim Morton somewhere balled up in that mess, that phlegm that's coming back to the city. It's like, why didn't they? So that's what I would have liked to have seen. In 8 months, you could have organized things in a way, and you should have enough knowledge to do. Look, if I'm the mayor, I don't need a damn consultant to come in here and tell me how to do anything like restructuring and reorganizing. I don't know. You're hiring people these salaries and they're not doing any work.
Well, can you explain to the people what it's about?
Permit me to say this. Permit me to interject before I forget, which I've just forgotten. But Baltimore is full of extremely bright, talented, and creative people. I've met many of these people in my career. I am talking to some of them right now, you two ladies and the audience who are tuning in. I have met many of these courageous and bright and smart, academically fine-tuned ambassadors who are community leaders and community advocates and nonprofit leaders. Baltimore is full of people who are willing to come and help make a difference. And it is somewhat problematic to me, even somewhat slightly offensive to me, that every time we look for an answer, we're looking outside of our boundaries. But yet, every time you go to a community meeting or some other citywide enterprise gathering, the conversation stems to, what are you doing? What are you doing as citizens? Why aren't you working with this person and that person to help make a difference? And so if we have the bandwidth and the capacity to do just what you're encouraging us to do, then why aren't we being utilized and even compensated to help be part of this platform for change? And for me, it's not really the money. It is the opportunity to be meaningfully engaged in the process of municipal transformation. It's about helping our city to be better and taking it off of the map as one of the worst places to live and making it one of the best places to grow and thrive. And we have seen too many instances where communities within Baltimore City are treated differently, are given different reverence by our elected officials because of the zip code. People are people. We have heard all of the lectures about social determinants of health, where people are born, live, and die, and the influencers that affect the spaces in which they live, which comes down to a bottom line question of equity for me. We know one size does not fit all. Not all communities are alike. They are dealing with different anomalies, different situations and circumstances by virtue of the space in which they live, whether they have access to food, fresh air, tree canopies, jobs, whatever the case may be. A parent who is worried more about whether or not her child who leaves the building or home in the morning will make it home safely in the evening alive has a different experience than someone who lives in a tree-lined community making $175,000 a year. They're not suffering the same illnesses, which means that for Baltimore City, equity has to be tailored to the communities, and we have to give them what they need to first succeed and then thrive. It's very simple.
So I know that, and you know, at your time there in Baltimore City, and I do want to talk about how that happened, because that's another example of how Baltimore tries to silence people. But I do want to talk about, like, as far as equity, it was a big campaign topic. You know, when we were in the agencies, it was, oh, in your goals, write down how your office impacts equity. That's, you know, so I'm like, oh, do we do this and that? And then you type it in your little performance plan and stuff, or you talk about it with your little section or whatever group you're leading, and then that was it. And then they're still talking about equity. So what is the city doing? You know, did you type that up in your performance plan, the whole equity piece, Linda, when you were working for the city? I know I had to, and I was like,
oh, well,
okay.
well, first of all, I had to engage in a discussion of passion about whether or not it was even provident and appropriate to include an equity goal in the performance plan for managers and supervisors. I mean, it was second nature for me. All of the leading industries do this. The federal government does it. The state government does it. Why is it that this is even something that we have to even debate? And so, you know, eventually there was a performance element that I had crafted and given 20 or 30 illustrations of how managers and supervisors could meet the performance element in equity. But none of that means anything if the culture in which people work do not support and sustain practices that are fair, decent, and transparent. If I have an equity goal as a manager and I'm getting ready to promote somebody and I put the panel together and
wait, panel.
if I put the, yeah, if I
people.
Yeah, if I put the panel together and there is some preconception as to who the victor is going to be in the promotion process, then what difference does the equity goal make? If in a particular work environment, if you are not disciplining people according to the standard as opposed to whether you like them or not, then what difference does the equity goal make? And that is why I'm saying that leaders of agencies must be held accountable for the outcomes. We recently had a situation where there was a $150,000 outlay by the city of Baltimore in a case involving a whistleblower EEO case. Well, you all read that in the Baltimore Brew. If not,
yes,
please read it. It's an interesting read. It's an interesting read. I asked you who's being held accountable.
Who? Number one, who allowed that to happen, and who covered that up? Why did the IG not have a report? I mean, we talked about this.
I want to know who's going to jail. Is anybody going to go to jail for that?
What happened? Nobody knows what happened. Nobody knows what happened. I'm telling you, there's been instances. I want to talk about the director of finance because I haven't even ever spoken about him, and I'm just ashamed of myself. Henry Raymond. Yeah. He's had plenty of IG reports on his organization and everybody down. Now, if this was corporate America, you cut off the head of the snake. You got all kinds of stuff going on in your procurement office. You got all kinds of stuff going on in all your different offices, and you still running finance, who is one of the highest paid, by the way, city employees. How is this man still running finance? Because when all that stuff happened up under him, where's the accountability?
The question has to be asked. He who manages the money, trace the money. Trace the money and the perks that are associated with the dispensation of the funding. Where is it going? Who's benefiting? Who's not benefiting?
That's a matter. They keep them in place. So I believe they keep certain people in place, heading certain agencies up, because they allow. Now, we've got all this money coming in. They allow some misappropriations, and they know they're compromised, so they can get away with certain things, So when you have somebody heading up, and I implore everyone watching, go look at the old IG reports and look at everything that came under the Department of Finance. The same person is still running the Department of Finance. The same person. I think there was an issue even with his deputy. Now, don't quote me, at one point, just right up under him, I think there had to be some changes made because of some inappropriate or unethical behavior. So when we talk about leadership and accountability, there is no accountability for the leaders. You've got to be responsible for everything going on under you. And if it's too much is happening, how are you still running the director of finance? Do you know how much money goes through that man's hands?
Well, I mean, it's the same thing with federal funding. I mean, there's a whole chain of custody that is associated with the appropriation of federal funds to state and local municipalities. And we don't have enough people in place, or we have not had enough people in place at the federal level historically to manage and track and hold accountable how that funding is being used or exploited, for that matter. And it is until you have people who avail themselves of the IG or their congressional constituent or someone to bring this to light, does it come to light. I mean, there are rules and regulations all over the place that deal with accountability, fiduciary responsibility, chain of custody, whatever the vocabulary is, it all leads to the same thing. And the question becomes, I think, for our listening audience today, is what role do you play in helping to create a more accountable municipality called Baltimore City? What role are you willing to play? I think if folks, just as was the clamor down in Federal Hill, we're going to withhold our taxes unless you do something. That is a legitimate consideration. You pay.
I think that was the inequity then again, Melinda. They were talking about holding their taxes, but we know like you can't do that for so long because then you're gonna get all these extra fees and all this other stuff. It was the demographic.
Well, I mean, I understand that, but I do also think that until folks consider much more stronger options than simply having conversations such as these that perk the spirit and titillate the mind, but do nothing other than just that. Until these voices get together and coalesce, there will not be the real platform that is going to inspire the change that we're talking about.
I think the groups need to organize. There's so many different factions. Everyone's unhappy about a variety of different things, and they just need to be more cohesive, and they need to go down, and they need to in groups, not just one group this day, because it's like they expect it at lunchtime. You know what I mean? Like every day it's a new group. So I think that all of the organizations need to start uniting. Oh, and not necessarily that they like each other or that they agree, but they all have a common goal, which is to see a better Baltimore.
Absolutely.
So and just unite. We need more unification. I don't care if they're east, west, south, north. You know, whether it's the community associations, whatever. Everyone is kind of having the same issues. No one wants crime in their communities, black, white, blue, or green. We don't want it. Everyone wants the best for their kids, black, white, blue, or green. You know, whether you're rich, poor, middle class, whatever, we want the best for our children. We want health care. We want trash picked up, you know what I mean, from wherever. So I think we just need more people to start unifying.
Well, here's the problem, and I'm going to be the bad cop. I'm just gonna say, I'm gonna keep it real because that's all I know. Okay, so so I don't know all the community organizations. I don't know everyone doing everything. I'm not gonna sit here and say I'm out in the street doing everything I can because honestly, it's just so much. I'm trying to do what I can, but what I am going to tell you, and Nicole and I have some really deep offline discussions, and I have to be transparent here to say a lot of these community leaders, they're not great leaders either. Let's be for real. All the organizations aren't coming together. It's a lot of I don't like this person. I don't like that person. Oh no, I've been in the fight longer than you. It's all this infighting again, this tribal type mentality, the slave mentality. And I told Nicole earlier today. We spoke last week to Lawrence, to the Honorable Lawrence Bell about the Black church not being involved. And there being kind of this selfish behavior in the Black church, and the Black church not getting down on the street and handling the business of the people. Okay, so we've got these people that are worried about how much money they're making. We've got pastors driving Bentleys. It's just like it's all this selfishness. You think that's not going down in the community organizations as well? You think they're not just worried about getting money, federal money, and money in their pocket just to take care of themselves? You think they're not using our children as pawns? Acting like they care about our children. So it's the same people. The pulpit fake pastors are running their pulpit, these fake community organizations as well, and it's not a community mindset. So,
well, I do believe that there is some exploitation there, but I do believe more than that. The point that you raised earlier about coming together, we are much too fragmented, and that fragmentation has been the capital in terms of this disjointed state of Baltimore City, because we all know what happens when the masses come together and stay together. We've seen that in families, we've seen that in churches, we've seen that in communities, and right now we really have too much of a divide. We've got community leaders that are aging. We need to build a new generation of community advocates, give them the skills, knowledge, and abilities to understand how to do the job, mentor them, nurture them, if they're willing to take the time. to do so. But at the same time, as we are building that perspective, the question still remains. Folks have to be held accountable. And I believe that when folks are not being held accountable, there should be a consequence. Just as my failure to follow my parents' instruction resulted in a consequence as a child and a lesson learned. There are no lessons learned, there are no consequences. And until we begin to work together to determine exactly what those consequences should be, nothing is going to change. And these conversations are going to continue to be the same, different faces having the same exchange of words. We need to do something different. We need to inspire something different. I see a number of comments coming in.
Yes. 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 Lots of great comments coming in about accountability, things going on in the community. Bryce Samuels asked who. I don't know. I can answer that question if you get a little more specific. I want to get a bit specific in the accountability because I like names. I like to say names. It's something about, I feel like I'm being direct. So we talked about Henry Raymond, who is the director of finance. If you're Baltimore City paying taxes, look them up. Look up the IG reports, learn about who's running these agencies. I want to go down next to DPW. Root Director Chow is gone. That's someone. So I want you to talk, Linda, about how you ended up working for DPW, just briefly. I want to talk about that because we talk about community engagement and an active community member, which you are. Tell me how that happened. Tell the viewers how.
Absolutely. So let me say this. My community engagement was born from my substantial federal experience as a civil rights practitioner. So I didn't become a community advocate as a novice, just loving my community. I stepped in to be a community advocate, having had the best leaders in federal government mentor me, coach me, and guide me. And so when I retired from the federal government in 2010, I became available for community service. In fact, I was probably very much a transplant during my 30 years in federal service because I spent most of my time on the road. I've been to every state in the nation and most countries internationally, traveled as a diplomat, had a wonderful federal experience. I wouldn't change anything for it. Worked with the best colleagues, A and B students, not C- and D+ trying to get by. People always putting forth their best. And it was an inspiration to come to work every day. So having retired from that, I began one of my mentors, in fact, my community neighbors, whom also is a renowned community champion, recently deceased, Ruby Couch, mother of Earl Amin, and asked me to become active in the community association. And I went to a couple of community association meetings, and I said, oh my, this is really very near and dear to me. I mean, these people they're aging and they need, some inspiration. And so I joined the meeting and I agreed to volunteer my time. And I was spending actually 50, 60 hours a week pro bono, going to meetings, going down to City Hall, testifying, writing letters and papers. And it was at the point of the Ashburton Tank project up at the corner of Liberty Heights and Hilton Street that I had my opportunity to become most vocal around community issues. And it involved the Department of Public Works and what we believed as an attempt to withhold from the community information regarding the existence of hexavalent chromium in the soil at Hanlon Park that had been unearthed, which has dire consequences for an aging community, for a community that has respiratory problems, and just is overall indecent not to share that information and be transparent at the point that this toxic chemical was unearthed. Having heard that,
Hanlon Park, which is a majority Black neighborhood surrounded with Black residents in West Baltimore, the city and the state, where they were doing this unearthing and putting these underground pipes.
right.
And so there were some chemicals that was not disclosed to the community. Right?
Absolutely. And we found out about it, and we didn't find out about it through any public disclosure process that DPW shared. We found out about it surreptitiously. If we hadn't been doing our own reconnaissance work, and if we didn't have tentacles out there, we probably would have never known. But, fortune favors those. And so fortune favored us, and we learned about it. And I became absolutely outraged that the city would allow officials to know about this and withhold information. And we galvanized our resources and we went public, and we had several meetings with Director Chow, and Director Chow was most willing to listen and most willing to take accountability. And as a result of having brought these issues to him, he agreed to most of our demands, to soil resampling, moving out the contaminated soil and disposing of it as appropriate through whatever the chain of custody happened to be, providing another series of testing on the soil once the contaminated soil was removed, including us in regular ongoing meetings in the construction process, and they occurred once a month, and a number of other variables. Now, along with that, apparently the city of Baltimore had just decided that it was going to implement the equity ordinance. And so concurrent with all of this going on, the equity ordinance had been passed, and the equity ordinance required city agencies to have an equity principle, this, that, and the other. And Director Chow asked me to consider launching that position for the Department of Public Works. I tell you, I labored over that. Because on the one hand, I had been very active in the community. I was attending all of these meetings, going down to City Hall, didn't care that I was doing it pro bono. It was just good work to do. And folks felt that if I surrendered that and took a job with the city, my community, many people within my community, not everyone, but many people felt that I was betraying my community. And I'm an independent thinker. I am very unlikely to be influenced except for by the people who I know have my best interests at heart. My mother and father, they're no longer here. So it would be my siblings. I mean, I have a very close circle of confidants, and I have to trust my instinct because it has never failed me wrong, and it has resulted in many successes in the past. And so my response was, I think I would be better off being on the inside and influencing change and learning how these systems tick and operate than to be on the outside knocking on the door. Hey, let me in. What's going on? And so as a result of coming inside, I was able to meet people, to understand how business was being conducted, and to leave Baltimore City with a very clear understanding of why we are failing.
So
I understand now.
So you were an active, outspoken community member, exposed chemicals that were being unearthed in a Black neighborhood.
Yes.
And had you not done that, I guess they would have covered it up. It would have never been such a clean process, I guess.
Absolutely.
You had to make some
Absolutely.
changes. So
Absolutely.
you're offered a job, and do you think you were offered that position with the city to silence you? Because
I mean, I think that the city believed that by bringing me on board, that what they may have perceived as being instigated by my capacity to understand and deal with this and challenge these issues would cease. That might have been a consideration, but I will tell you, my voice was just as vociferous and just as hearty inside as it is right now.
and what happened because your voice was so vociferous and hearty as it is?
I beg your pardon?
I think that resulted in your termination with the city.
Well, that probably very well could have resulted in my not being given the opportunity to meet, greet, and brief our new Director of Public Works, Jason Mitchell, on what I believe is and was the posture of DPW in dealing not only with our communities, but with the humanity called the employees within the Department of Public Works. There is much work to be done. And I left that department feeling grateful for having been given the opportunity to serve the citizens of Baltimore. I will never regret that. The compensation paled in comparison, not only to what I was accustomed to making, but what I learned by being on the inside. So I thank
What did you learn?
I learned I learned that what you see is what it is. Okay. What you see is what it is. And that people aren't operating by the book, that people are not being necessarily employed because they have the best skills and talents to bring to the table, but perhaps there are other motives that result in them being put and cushioned in the positions where they are. Now, let me just say this. I'm not suggesting at all that Baltimore is 100% full of incompetent people. I met some very intelligent people, a handful that if I had the opportunity to lead a corporation or to run a government, I'd pull them in with me. But it was about a handful. I have seen so much that I encourage folks to wait for my tell-all, because I will publish. I am also a writer, as I am a speaker, and I will publish. And it'll be not necessarily focused on Baltimore, but it'll be lessons learned about leadership. Okay. And I have learned so much about the absence and paucity of leadership when I look at Baltimore City, and it's heartbreaking.
So you talked about the whistleblower in DPW. We talked about your experience. My opinion of it all is I do believe the MO was very Kim Morton-ish because she was part of DPW at the time. And I mention her often, and you don't see her often, and you don't see photos of her often, but she was a huge player in Baltimore City. And she is spoken about in the article about the whistleblower. And so I want to ask you, why did, God forgive me, I don't know who puts these things in my head. Why did a roach like Kim Morton survive so long in Baltimore City? What was so good about Kim Morton? I'm sorry, I have to ask. What was so good? What was so effective about this person that was the chief of staff, got moved over, became the chief of staff at DPW, then got moved over, became Jack Young's chief of staff? It's just, why did they recycle something like that? Well, I'm trying. Maybe it's just me. I want to get another opinion. What was so good about that?
Well, I found Kim Morton to be extremely refreshing. She was courageous. She spoke her mind.
She spoke her mind to whom? To people she was firing? Or beneath her? Who did she speak?
I found her to be very, now I don't know what happened when I left the room, but I found her to be extremely forthcoming in all of the meetings that I have seen her in. And perhaps, I just wasn't as close to the nexus to know Kim Morton as others, perhaps you, by working directly in City Hall. See, I wasn't directly in City Hall. I only got to exchange with Kim Morton when there was a need for us to address a specific issue that was brought up. But
I mean, Kim, and I don't know if cronies are watching. If anybody knows, just tell me, like, what is it? I mean, is it?
I can't hear you.
I'm just saying, if anyone's watching that knows her, tell me. I mean, what is it? What was it? I didn't see it. I personally didn't see it.
So where is she now?
When the administration changed, she left prior to the administration changing. And, I don't know whether or not she left voluntarily or involuntarily, whether she had options or not. But, clearly, she's no longer there. So we know that.
Right. And we don't want her to return. And I bring her up a lot because a lot of the citizens don't know who this person is. She was never on television, wouldn't really make quotes, kind of hid and slithered. And, when the lights turned on, she'd go run outside, walking her dogs, bringing dogs to her. Just the level of professionalism. It was very questionable. It was questionable for me, just for me. And so I just want people to know and look it up and do your research and just figure out like who's really running city government. In my mind, people like that were kind of running things, and I don't think a lot of the citizens realized who was really running the city for some amount of years.
Okay, but let's look at this, and that is Kim Morton is no longer there, and many of the same people are still in city government.
That she put in place.
Well, but she could have put them in place, but they didn't have to remain in place. So the question is there more than what we think? Or are these people just perceived to be good by the leaders who have retained them? I don't know. I can tell you that if we go back to looking for accountability and outcomes, because that's what it all boils down to me. Absolutely. In terms of leadership. If we look for measures, if we look for an improved billing system that has a 1% error rate, then we don't see it. If we look at trash collection that has a 1% miss rate, then we don't see it. If we look at transportation infrastructure that fairly works its way through the city and creates safe means of traversing with a minimal error or delay rate, then we don't see it. But she's no longer there, and those people are. If we look at the city planning and its infrastructure, and how the city is changing and what those plans are, and whether or not the citizens really know what the secret plans are for the future of the city. And I say secret because these plans should be published. People should know what is happening, how the Ashburton Tank Project and the new $1 million Cahill Center and the changes at Drew Hill connect to a trajectory of future sustainability for a reimagined community that is yet to manifest itself. These discussions have not occurred in urban environments.
So where can we don't have a public city plan, the plan for the
I think that they would argue that the city plans are public. I think that they would argue that they are. They're public, perhaps, if you go search for them or if you ask about them, but the extent to which people know what is planned for their communities and what's going to happen over time and what those changes are going to be and what their voice should be in terms of weighing in, because federal funds, the city that receives federal funds is a city that's open to public inspection and scrutiny. And therefore, all of this information should be on the table. Right. And yet communities
would love to have seen the city plan if that was in the plan all along. Wouldn't that have been nice?
Yeah, and folks are learning as they go along what changes are or what changes have been planned that have not included their voice and their engagement. And that's part of the fundamental capital process for reimagining cities and reimagining communities and so forth and so on. Citizens have not been engaged in a manner that allows for their full and active voice from conceptualization of project to completion of project. They get brought on. They get brought on when it's appropriate or when they've clamored enough. But by that time, it's too late, and the decisions have been made. The funds have been obligated. And well, it's never really too late, but the decisions have been made and the funds have been obligated. And then
the development has been awarded to somebody.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, if they're supposed to be held accountable, the public is supposed to be involved in the process. Okay, we got that part. We know they're not doing it. So my thing is that if they're taking federal funds, does that not get us back to the point of you've invoked your rights, because you want to see the information. They have failed to give it to you. What's next? Because I'm on what's next at this point. Because we've seen it happen all around the city and everything. I know for a fact right now, there's like 3 people that I know that have requested information and they haven't gotten it. And the city's like, I don't know if they're throwing up their middle fingers, showing them but I don't know. Like,
they don't respond to PIA requests, and
they don't respond.
So they need to be held accountable for that.
Well, and that's not only to individuals, that's to the brew and other places where they impose they impose these onerous requirements because they can.
Right.
Because it's intended to discourage and impede. And, I go back to the fundamental question that I asked at the beginning. I mean, we have heard the talk and we've seen the news about those individuals who plan to invoke a suit if there's not a change in the leadership of the Baltimore City Public Schools. I mean, that ultimately is an option. There is the option to avail oneself of the opportunity to meet with the leaders and to convey what the expectations are and to convey through our elected district council people what the expectations are and to hold those folks accountable.
I know what the expectation is and I know how we hold them accountable.
How is that?
That's 3 years.
Every one of them out. I'm just tired.
That's 3 years.
I know.
3 years.
I know. But we got to.
I'm just trying to figure out. We got to figure out like now. You know what I mean? Like 3 years, more families to be displaced, right?
Yes.
The crime is so ridiculous right now. So the taxes aren't going down. The water bills are high. The potholes, if you don't fall in one, I mean, so we got to do now. So my thing is that I've been calling for the federal government to intervene. I think that the state, Governor Hogan, he summed it up in one word: incompetence. So if the state knows what's up,
we get all our feelings. It's like,
and that is why
it's like that. We take it.
So Tamara,
we get in our feelings when Governor Hogan says we're incompetent. We talk about Black people. You talk about Baltimore. I know we're freaking incompetent.
No, he's talking about them. He's not talking about Baltimore. He's talking about them.
Ladies. Tamara, yes, I think this is a good time to indicate what at least a good vanguard of the citizenry have done in terms of requesting the meeting. So you want to talk about that?
So there's a meeting September. Well, we're going to have a guest on next week to talk briefly about a meeting that is scheduled with Ekwaze and Fume to discuss the $600 million infrastructure money that will be coming on. And so there's a discussion on September 9th. We'll have that information on the show next week. We will have a speaker. we will have a speaker talk about that meeting. And I will openly say that we have asked, where is Kwasi Mfume? So I'm happy. I would love to talk to him. It's like, where are you? I'm glad he's, she's showing up somewhere. I would love to be a part of that discussion because we also want to hold him accountable.
Absolutely. And some of the questions that have already been coming in with respect to the planning of that meeting center around accountability. Who's going to manage the oversight of that dispersion of funds? Who's going to make the decision as to who benefits and who's not advantaged as a result of that funding?
And how much minority neighborhoods and participation on contracts?
Absolutely.
All of that.
All of that. And so all of that has already been staged as issues under consideration. And the more people that know about this prospective meeting and join in, that will allow the large S of armies to coalesce around this growing groundswell around accountability.
Will this be this will be a Zoom meeting? So will comments be on?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, as long as folks follow and honor the Zoom protocol, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not managing the meeting.
We will have details next week.
Yes.
Beginning of the show about the meeting, how you can participate. I'm going to participate because I haven't seen Mr. Mfume. I don't see him on C-SPAN. I'm just looking for him. I don't know where he's at. I don't know what he's doing. So I'm going to definitely participate because if I walk by him, I probably wouldn't know what he looked like. I don't see him enough. I'd like to see him more. So, and again, would love to have him on the show if he dare. Okay. So thank you so much, Nicole. We had some comments also about not understanding why city leaders are given carte blanche, where they undermine policy, procedures, and professionalism.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll get some people on the show in the future that can talk specifically about some more of that. I plan on doing that.
Well, Tamara, it's obvious that accountability is a big issue, and it's obvious that the people, including the employees, expect a model of leadership that is going to be poised, professional, that will encourage their development, that will stick to tried and true metrics and outcomes in terms of holding people accountable, and who will be fair in terms of their administration of people as well as the public funds and the public trust.
Well, I hope they have their pens out tonight, and because they're just I hope they're writing down the ideas and implementing something. I mean, there's no point in watching the show if you guys aren't going to take something from it and use it. My goodness. Okay, so tonight was about leadership and accountability, and we don't have any in Baltimore City, and we're going to try to get some of that. So, Nicole, do you want to summarize? And Linda, thank you for joining us again, and you guys can take us out. I think I've done enough damage tonight.
We have a lot.
Well, shall I go?
Go ahead.
Absolutely. I am optimistic that there will be a salvation for Baltimore. And I'm not saying that one person whom is elected to lead Baltimore is going to be that salvation. I think we are the salvation. I think we are the smart people who pay taxes, who see what the potholes are, and we will together come up with solutions that will result in better outcomes for the employees and the citizens of Baltimore City. The more we discuss these topics and make the public aware, the larger our venue is, the greater our reach, the bigger the opportunity to influence change and outcome. So I would just simply say to our listening audience and to you ladies, please do not be discouraged. There is a window there. Don't jump off of it. There is a ledge. Stay tight. I think that Baltimore will be better. It'll be better over time, and it'll be better as a result of the collective influences and leadership and voice that we bring to this particular issue. So thank you.
Yes, we have to exterminate first. A lot of the roaches. Okay, so Nicole, I'm sorry.
I'm not sure how I'm supposed to follow Ms. Batts on that, but I do 100% agree. There's some beautiful people in Baltimore City. I would like to see more of them working and being employed into these positions to help lower our unemployment rate here. And just taking care of them, you know, and everyone, and realizing the word equity goes back to when we were in kindergarten, first grade, learning about the equal sign, right? So it just goes back to the basics. That's it, equal, and everything. So I'm just hoping. I don't know who we gotta call in, Superman from the federal government, but we need
exterminators
and the exterminators and the Ghostbusters and everybody else. We need transparency, equity, accountability,
and the Justice Department. Sorry,
Justice Department. So, I mean, it's a list, but it can be done. And I'm pushing for unification. Like, I'm even talking to people that I don't really care for.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that we don't agree on a lot of things, you know, but they're for their community and I'm for multiple communities. So it's, and I think that's the common ground. Like, we don't have to agree on everything, you know,
Absolutely.
but we do agree that we all deserve quality of life. So
absolutely,
I'm a believer. Miss Batts, thank you for coming.
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Always. I mean, it's hard to follow behind your speech and stuff, but summation, and of course, Miss Tamara Brown, we're gonna get her some raid.
Absolutely, absolutely.
They don't come around me. They do not come around me. I welcome them, but they don't. I don't need it. My mouth is my raid. Okay, so. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We'll be on next week. We'll give you details about Quasi and Fume, so stay tuned. And also, we're coming to a neighborhood near you. We're coming to your neighborhood at some point. We're going to have some live shows. We're going to talk to the neighborhoods, talk to the people. We're going to get in and get your input in. So, you know, hit us up, sistabizshow@gmail.com. Let us know you want us to come to your neighborhood. Find a space. We're going to be there. We're going to get some community discussion going on. All right, good night, and we will see you guys next week.
Thank you.
So long.
Bye-bye.